Welcome to In Progress, a podcast to help you grow and learn how to become a better version of yourself. Now here's your host, Michael Cirigliano.
Welcome to In Progress. I'm your host, Michael Cirigliano. So, I've had a number of people message me asking how to start a podcast. And though it seems pretty easy to somebody not trying to jump into it, when you actually go through the motion of trying to get a podcast up and running, there are some things that you learn along the way. And this video is basically going to be a video for those of you that don't know what to do, or maybe you're just scared to make the jump. So for starters, I started the podcast because I had a video in the past talking about this too. I've been at work before. I've been at work for years now, talking to coworkers about how I'm not happy in my current situation. I do this, and this to make so much money and not have to work a day in my life and all that bullshit. So I figured a great topic for a podcast for myself, something that I'd be passionate about, because that's a key. You have to be passionate about it. Even if it's you just like bullshitting with friends, you have to be passionate about it. And for me, that was that. Because I would be having these conversations with coworkers and friends about how I'm going to start a, real estate business. I'm going to do a food catering business. I'm going to do a number of things. I've bounced around a million different ideas. So I felt like having a YouTube page that has all of those different ideas in one place was perfect for not just myself, but anyone else in that same mindset. So rule number one, you definitely have to be passionate about what you're talking about, no matter what it is. I've had hairdressers hit me up asking, how do you start a podcast? How much does it cost? Barbers, mechanics, just regular people. You can have a podcast. I'd watch a podcast of, two dudes at a bar drinking and just shooting the shit. Like, a lot of podcasts are just that in itself. But yeah, so you have to be passionate about what you're talking about. And then when it comes to equipment, right now I'm, 30 episodes in maybe? And the only equipment that I've ever used for my podcast the entire time is the camera that you see right now is an iPhone 12 Pro Max. You change the settings to 1080 pixels or 4K if you're really trying to go above and beyond. 1080 is fine though. You set the settings in the phone to 1080 pixels and you can record a video in 1080 pixels, and then on YouTube it's a high quality video. The ring lights that I'm using, they're TikTok ring lights essentially. So the same ring lights that you see on all the TikToks, they're like $10, $15 a pop. I have two, and that's it. So it's not that expensive when in regards to equipment. And then obviously the microphone, I have a collar mic, which is a lot cheaper than the typical podcast microphones, right? The big ones, those range anywhere from 50 to 80 if you want to do that. But like these ones, solid quality in my opinion. They're not really noticeable, which is why I did it, because I don't want to have a podcast where it's like a microphone in your face, right? I want to have something that looks a little more natural, so when I do have guests on, because that's primarily what I do, it looks like we're just talking like regular people. There's no microphone you have to adjust. So these collar mics, $20. You can get one if you want to do an individual podcast. You can get two like I had for a while, or three in case you're going to have three guests. So I currently have 3 microphones in case I have 3 guests. If you get more than one microphone, you need the adapter for the iPhone, because it needs to plug into the iPhone to be able to have the audio and video synced. And then if you're going to have 2 microphones, you need a splitter and the adapter. So all in for audio, I'm currently sitting at $60 for the microphones, $5 for the adapter, $10 for the splitter. So $75 total for that. Ring lights, another $30. So we're at $100 right now. $100 for the video and audio equipment. That's it. And like I said, I have 3 microphones. You don't need 3 microphones unless you're going to have a podcast with 3 people on it. And in only one of my episodes did I need 3 microphones, but it's good to have an extra one just in case. Then when it comes to the distribution of the podcast. YouTube is obviously the main one for a number of reasons. If you're going to be doing a video podcast, then obviously YouTube is going to be your main platform. Then Instagram and TikTok are my other two, all free. Then when you're starting to get into the audio side of things, that's where it costs a little bit of money. So to try to put your podcast on Apple Podcasts costs, I want to say, somewhere in the vicinity of $50 for a year, which isn't terrible. And Apple Podcasts obviously has a lot of ears to it, so you don't want to miss out on that. And then for Spotify, Google Podcasts, and pretty much every other podcast platform, you actually have to get an RSS link. An RSS link is essentially a URL for your podcast specifically that you paste into these other websites, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and it updates daily with your podcast. So for myself, I record my podcast in advance because we're not talking about current events on my podcast. So it doesn't matter if I record my podcast 2 weeks ago and you hear it now. Like, for example, this podcast episode that I'm recording right now won't be released for another 2 weeks. I have an episode coming out next week and then this one. So I record in advance, which gives me time to be able to edit the podcast. So you want to be able to have the RSS link, which that costs $100 one time. And $100 one time seems like a lot, but you're on every platform. You're on Spotify with your own personal page. Spotify sets it up for podcasters. So I didn't have to do anything. You just paste your RSS link into Spotify, into the Spotify podcast, which is completely different. Spotify for podcasters is a different website and platform to upload than just Spotify. But if you go to just Spotify, now you could listen to my podcast. Google Podcasts is the same exact thing. And then any of the other podcasting apps are the same thing. So if you listen to your podcast on different, like just for podcasters apps, like I think there's one called Waveform. If you listen on there, my podcast is going to be there. Only because I have the RSS link. I don't even do anything and it's there. So $50 for Apple, $100 for RSS link, and you're set up for distribution through all audio platforms. And then YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok are free. Editing software for my podcast, when I'm editing the video, I use iMovie. Again, free. So I'm using iMovie to edit the podcast, and that takes, it takes a little bit of time. But when you have, because my biggest hurdle that I had when I was doing my previous podcast was we were using those big clunky podcaster mics, and synchronizing audio and video was a bitch. So doing it this way completely gets rid of that problem, so I never have to synchronize audio and video. So me editing a video will take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour maximum, and it really comes down to just me chopping the video up into 2 separate episodes because I don't want to have, the Joe Rogan Experience type thing where I have 2-hour-long episodes. In my opinion, there's no point. You're getting good content on both halves of the video, so it doesn't matter. Putting an intro, an outro, and saving it. Half hour to hour maximum. More cost is going to be the intro and the outro, right? So I was fortunate enough to have a brother who is a musician. So my intro and my outro are both his songs. So I didn't really have to go too far and reach out to too many record labels or artists or management to be able to utilize a well-known song that's popular now and maybe isn't later, who knows. I have a brother who's a musician, so I was able to just hit him up, pay him and his producer for the music, and that's why you see on my intro and my outro his name on the bottom of each one. And that price varies depending on who you're hitting up for your music. Obviously, if you hit up Chris Brown, you're probably paying a lot of money to get that. If you hit up, a local musician, which they would love to do it, a lot of them would probably do it for little to nothing. You'd be able to get a crazy good song on your intro or outro for virtually nothing. And then for the voice you hear at the beginning of my podcast, the intro voice, that I had to go onto Fiverr.com. That's Fiver.com, I believe. Maybe 2 R's, who knows. and that cost me $25. Cost $10 for the voice itself, and then because I'm using it commercially on the podcast to potentially be monetized, I had to pay a commercial licensing fee, I believe it was, and that was another $15, so $25 total. So starting a podcast is not that expensive. At first, maybe, if you don't have the money laying around, it's a little expensive, but all in all, it's not as bad as people think it is. I have a cell phone that I'm using for my camera. I'm having cheap ring lights used for my lighting, and that works completely fine. Cheap microphone that works completely fine. Audio and video are synchronized every time, no matter what, which is perfect. And then all I have to do is put an intro and an outro on the end of each video and the beginning of each video, save it, upload it to YouTube, and then proceed to upload it to my RSS Link and Apple Podcasts. And that's it. So it's not that expensive. Another thing you might want to consider is, and the reason why a lot of people don't do it, is maybe this doesn't interest you, which is fine. It's not for everybody. Everything is not for everybody. So maybe you're not interested in this. But if you are, the biggest hindrance for me jumping into this was being nervous about being in front of a camera and the judgment, right? Everybody is afraid of being judged. Oh, they're doing a podcast. Oh, that's so stupid. Oh, they're doing this. They're so stupid. Well, you have two choices, right? You can either jump in, both feet, and just do it. Say you did it. Even if it doesn't take off, you did it. And the judgment really doesn't exist. People, maybe behind your back, maybe behind my back, who knows? But to my face, nothing. Nobody judges you, because podcasts are a pretty normal thing in our day-to-day life now. Our society, there's podcasts everywhere. Podcasts are monetizing every day. New podcasts are popping up every day. So you can't be afraid of the judgment, and you can't be afraid to get in front of a camera and talk. Because in all reality, yeah, me talking to this camera, I could potentially be talking to millions. But right now, there's no one here but me. So I'm really just talking to myself, which is kind of weird, I guess, in a way. But it's not as bad as you think. And then having guests on the podcast, you see me in all my other videos. I have guests on every time. The reason why I do it the way that I do it, which is free form, no script, no prior planning really, and then I do it in a different environment every time, is because my biggest problem with modern podcasters and modern podcasting is that it's in a set, and people come to you and you schedule it out in advance, and then you talk about all these different topics, and it's very structured. I don't live my life that way, and I'm not going to have my podcast that way. My podcast is an extension of who I am. So the reason why it is how it is because that's how I live my life. I like the free flow conversation. If you have a scripted conversation, in my opinion, it's not going to come off smooth. That's why you have podcasts like, I think LeBron James' podcast is called the Barbershop or The Shop or whatever, where they're just chopping it up, talking about anything and everything. And it's a hit. Joe Rogan Experience. He has someone who's very intelligent on his podcast to talk about whatever they're specialized in. And Joe Rogan just talks to them like normal people. There's a lot of misconception around podcasts where you have to know what you're going to be talking about ahead of time, and you can have somewhat of an idea going into it, but you can't have that lead the conversation. You have to just be talking to someone person to person like you would if you're out at a bar or if you're out at an event or a party or whatever. You just talk to them. And that's why in a lot of my videos you'll see me and the person are drinking, whether it's, an energy drink, a coffee, wine, beer, anything. Because we're just chopping it up like two people. I'm lucky enough to say that everybody that I've had on the podcast is a friend or family. And anyone who's not a friend or family that's been on my podcast now is. Because we have those deep conversations. And that's what I strive for in all of my podcasts. No matter what it is I'm talking about, I want the person that I'm talking to really be passionate about what it is they're talking about. And because of that, you'll get the better reactions from people watching. So that's what you really want to do. So I've had, like I said, I've had hairdressers hit me up. asking how do you start it. You can do a podcast about hairdressing and just teaching different ways to do it, getting different people in to talk about different styles, how to do hair on a white woman versus a black woman, how to do a perm versus, a regular cut. Barbers could be talking about how to do fades and whatever, or you could just chop it up. Because in all reality, you have to have personality to be on a podcast. And I'm lucky enough to be blessed with some charisma, personality, and I don't really get stifled ever. So I'm lucky enough to have that. But doing this as much as I've done it teaches you to be that way. I wasn't always outgoing and, not nervous or whatever. Me back in high school, I didn't talk to anybody. I was very shy. I was the epitome of an introvert. And just through growing up, working on myself, which is another big thing in this podcast, I learned how to not be that way. And I learned how to not worry about judgment. And that, at the end of the day, is the biggest thing that holds people back, is judgment. So you can't be afraid of people judging you. You have to really go into it knowing that this is going to be something you're working on. And it doesn't happen overnight. I had to work hard for the subscribers that I have. I had to hit people up. I had to show people that I didn't know my podcast and the idea to get subscribers. I have to put my videos on Instagram and TikTok to try and cover all platforms. You can't just sit back and expect it to blow up. It can. It definitely can. If your topics are good enough, if your charisma and personality are entertaining enough, if people like to listen to you, you'll take off. But you don't want to go into it with that expectation, because there's a very good chance you're going to be let down. It takes a long time. I believe in the podcasting community, in a video that I watched, it's called Pod, Burn Pod, something like that, essentially to the effect of you get burnt out from podcasting, because it is a very thankless job. I want to say it's not really a job, but it's very thankless. Like you don't see the results that you expect to get. Like, I'm here working on my podcast, and I might spend 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. There's been nights that I end my podcast at 11 p.m. and I'm up till 4 or 5 a.m. editing the podcast, uploading it, and all of that, all to get, a few views, maybe a subscriber or two, a few likes on Instagram, a few likes on TikTok. But you have to be in it for the long haul. That's why you have to be passionate about it. Because if you're passionate about it, then you see the value behind what you're putting out there, and that's what's going to keep you going. And there are people out there who think just like you. You're not as different as you like to think you are. Your mentality is not different. Nothing is different. People are very, very similar. Maybe in not all facets, but generally speaking, people are very similar. There's, like, in my podcast, for example, this is for people who don't like their day-to-day life, whether it be physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, their work life, whatever. There's a lot of people like that. A lot of people that are going to watch this are like that. So me doing a podcast for that topic made sense for me. And I'm one of those people. So that's why I'm passionate about it. That's why I see the value in it, even if the outcome isn't exactly what I want it to be when it comes to the statistics and the analytics on YouTube and all of that. It's something that I enjoy doing, and that's why I continue doing it. And nothing is going to stop me from doing it, because I enjoy it. I get to talk to people once, twice a week, upload a video. The people that are in the video are ecstatic to see themselves on a video, and they want to come back and do it again. And it builds relationships with people that you otherwise probably wouldn't cultivate. And that's the best part for me, is being able to cultivate relationships and meet people that I otherwise wouldn't have really met. Because doing this makes you have to go out there, get out of your comfort zone. You have to network. And those are important parts to growing your podcast and your name. You can't sit back and think it's going to happen. You have to advertise and market and put yourself out there. No one really likes doing that, but at the end of the day, that's the only way that you're going to find success in this field. And with that being said, like I said, this is a short video, and this is just to talk about how to get it. So all the links to the RSS Link website, Apple Podcast website, all the links for all the stuff and the name and description of everything that I'm using, I will throw that in the description of this video just to give you guys a list of what to do to start the podcast. And again, if you do have any questions about how to start a podcast, why I started my podcast, or anything, feel free to message me, comment, whatever, and I'll be here to answer those questions too. Thank you for watching.